This case takes place in Alaska during the 1990s. Sophie Sergey was studying marine biology at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and for the most part, she was really enjoying her time there. However, due to financial hardships and her mother's declining health, Sophie made the tough decision to put her college journey on pause. But she did intend on returning in a couple of years. Sophie was born in 1971 in Pickus Point, Alaska, which is a very small town with a strong native community. Sophie herself was a member of the Yupik tribe. She was described as an outgoing, smart, energetic, and friendly young woman, which is in large part due to the small, tight-knit community that she grew up in. In April of 1993, Sophie was in Fairbanks to go to a dentist appointment that she had scheduled. At the time, she was living temporarily with a friend named Shirley at the Bartlett Hall at her university. Then on April 25th, Sophie grabbed a few friends and went out to watch a couple movies and just hang out. The friends were out for several hours and Sophie returned to Bartlett Hall around midnight. Shirley and Sophie then decided to order a pizza. The pizza would arrive, and after finishing it at around 1:30 a.m., Sophie stepped out of the hall into the women's bathroom so that she could smoke a cigarette. And by the time she got back to the room, Shirley was gone, but she did leave a note saying that she was going to stay at her boyfriend's place for the night. So when morning rolled around and Shirley returned to the hall, she expected to see Sophie there to greet her. However, there was no sign of her anywhere. Shirley was a bit worried since Sophie was expected to still be in the dorm room at the time. Later on, Shirley still couldn't find Sophie, so she reported the issue to the police. Moments later, Sophie's family actually received a call from her orthodontist. They said that she had an appointment that she failed to show up for, which made her family concerned. Fast forward a few hours to about 2:45 p.m., the Bartlett Hall custodian stopped by the women's bathroom on the second floor near Shirley's room in order to clean it. And it's inside this bathroom that the custodian made a gruesome discovery. In a tub was the lifeless body of Sophie. Her face had a terrible knife wound and her pants had been pulled down while her top had been pushed up. She ultimately died as a result of a gunshot to the back of her head. Authorities were at the scene immediately and began investigating the area. The murder of Sophie Sergey struck fear in all of the students at the university, especially those staying in Bartlett Hall. At first, investigators believed that it was a male student who was responsible, but with little evidence, they had a tough time pinpointing the culprit. Investigators examined each of the tiles in the bathroom for evidence and were able to extract traces of DNA, but due to technological limitations at the time, the tiles were not very useful. Police interviewed a number of students in the dorm on the night of the murder, and one female student reported that they saw the light turned on to the bathroom at around midnight, which wasn't exactly odd since the bathroom could be accessed at any time, but what was strange were the crackling sounds she heard coming from inside. Another student whose room was next to the bathroom reported a thudding sound on the wall along with hushed voices. But as the years went by, the case gradually went cold with little to no new developments. Then in 2018, after nearly 3 decades, forensic technology had evolved significantly and new tools were able to match the DNA found at the crime scene back in 1993 to several suspects. With this new technology, investigators were able to build a family tree from public DNA databases which would lead to the culprit. Ultimately, they narrowed the search down to a man named Stephen Downs, who was a nursing student at the same university as Sophie during the 90s. At the time of the DNA match, police determined that Stephen was working as a nurse in Auburn, Maine, and arrested him. Of course, Stephen denied being responsible, stating that he didn't even know of Sophie before her death. However, investigators were 100% sure that they had their man, as there was no denying the validity of the DNA match. Stephen was never considered a suspect during the height of the investigation. After further digging, it was found that Stephen lived in the exact same dorm as Sophie, and none of his friends had any idea that he was a murderer. In 2003, he moved to Maine where he worked as a nurse, specializing in the care of people with intellectual disabilities. Then in 2016, 2 female co-workers shared that Stephen was making inappropriate and charged comments towards them. In the end, Stephen Downs received 75 years in prison for the murder of Sophie Sergey. Back in December 1996, a young woman named Julie Buskin graduated from the University of Oklahoma with a bachelor's in fine arts. Her family and friends shared that Julie was a very caring, popular, kind, and determined person. Perfect traits for Julie, as she planned to attend the University of Arkansas to study education, then later teach ballet to children. On December 20th in that same year, Julie was scheduled to drive a friend of hers to the airport. It was about 4 a.m. when they left, and this friend of Julie's would be the last person to ever see her alive. About an hour and a half later, a man that lived in the same apartment complex as Julie called police and reported a blood-curdling scream coming from the parking lot. They also said they heard phrases like "shut up" and "get in the car." When police arrived, there was nothing suspicious occurring at the location, but after interviewing other residents, they confirmed that there was indeed screaming. Some even caught a glimpse of the person screaming, and the description matched up with Julie. After knocking on her apartment and no one coming to the front door, authorities were more or less certain that it was Julie who had been abducted. Additionally, Julie's Red Eagle Summit was missing. Coincidentally, Julie's parents arrived at her apartment around the same time after making the trip from Arkansas to Oklahoma to help her pack and move out of the apartment. They were told that Julie had been abducted, and immediately their hearts raced as they asked for more details. Investigators scoured the nearby area as well as more obscure locations in hopes to find clues, or better yet, Julie herself. And they would find her just 12 hours from when she went missing. However, she was dead by that time. Her body was discovered at a lake about 15 miles from the apartment. Her hands were bound and she had a gunshot wound in the back of her head, which ended her life. There were also clear signs that she was assaulted. An investigation of the lake yielded foreign DNA as well as footprints in the sand. Analyzing the footprints, investigators believed that the shoe was a size 9 male Nike running shoe, and Nike themselves later confirmed the exact model shoe with authorities. Hours later, Julie's car was also found parked about a block from the apartment, and inside was the exact same sand found at the lake. Several weeks later, a man called police and said that he saw Julie's car the night that she was killed. He was actually driving along the same lake where her body was found. Julie's red car cut him off and zoomed down the road. The man admitted that this made him extremely angry, so he tailed the vehicle for over 5 miles. He even caught a glimpse of the people inside, one of which was, of course, Julie. The other person was described as a young Hispanic male with long, dark hair. Several leads would come in over the years, but one of the more notable ones occurred about 4 years after Julie's murder. Authorities released a composite sketch of the suspect from the car, and a female inmate at the Oklahoma County Jail got her hands on it. She informed police that the sketch looked a lot like a man she knew named Dennis. Investigators later found out that when Julie was still alive, Dennis lived nearby her, but when they confronted him for questioning, he refused to even talk to them. And needless to say, Dennis also refused to provide DNA for testing. But he was later forced to provide his DNA, and it was determined to not match what was found at the crime scene. So Dennis was no longer suspected of being responsible. Another 2 years later, a new suspect surfaces. This time, it's a man named Anthony Sanchez. Anthony was arrested in the past for his ex. According to another ex of Anthony's, he gifted her some Nike shoes and bought a pair for himself. The model matched up to the footprints at the lake, and Anthony was also a size 9. As is standard with anyone going to prison, Anthony had to provide DNA, which was later sent off to medical officials for testing. In the meantime, investigators searched Anthony's home, but couldn't find any evidence that would help convict him for Julie's murder. But after they left, the landlord decided to take a look for himself, and he found a .22 caliber bullet, then handed it to police. Investigators determined that that bullet was the same as the one found at the lake. Not long after, the DNA test results were in, and Anthony matched up with the evidence found at the lake back in 1996. turns out Anthony Sanchez lived only a mile from Julie and was 18 when he murdered her. He was known locally as being a thief with no morals. Law enforcement came up with the following theory to explain the events. They thought that Anthony may have been out on the 20th of December stealing Christmas presents and valuable items from people's vehicles. Right as Anthony was breaking into a car, Julie pulled into the parking lot, and fearing that he was seen, Anthony held Julie at gunpoint and forced her to drive to the lake. Once they arrived, Anthony raped her and ultimately shot her. Anthony Sanchez was sentenced to death for the murder of Julie Buskin in 2006. He was executed in 2023 at the age of 44 by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. This entry involves the first serial killer to have been convicted in the US on the basis of DNA evidence. Let's start with a victim named Debbie Dudley Davis, who was 35 years old in 1987. At the time, she had two jobs, one of which was as an account executive for a media outlet. The other was a job at a bookstore at the Cloverleaf Mall. On September 18th of that same year, Debbie and a friend visited Virginia Beach to see a performance from comedian Dana Carvey. The two had a great time, and Debbie was dropped off at her apartment later that night. Since it was late and dark out, Debbie's friend made absolutely sure that she witnessed Debbie step safely inside of her residence before she left. The next morning, a neighbor of Debbie's noticed her car engine was on, but there was no sign of a driver. The car was left there for several minutes, which the neighbor found very strange. Concerned, he called 911 and told authorities that the car belonged to Debbie. They knocked on her door, but got no response. A different neighbor who was close friends with Debbie had a key that was given to her by Debbie herself and offered to unlock the door for the police. Officers stepped inside and quickly noticed Debbie's body lying on the floor lifeless with only shorts on. It was obvious that foul play was involved as a blunt object was found nearby, and she also had a sock around her neck. Investigators believed that Debbie had been murdered sometime between 9 p.m. on the 18th and 9:30 a.m. on the 19th. Police also found a chair next to a window outside the residence, which was likely how the culprit gained access to the home. After hours of investigating the scene, authorities struggled to find any evidence, and little to no information was obtained when interviewing neighbors. Debbie's friends and family were also interviewed and asked if she might have had enemies. Everyone said that they found it highly unlikely that she made anybody angry. It's believed that the motive for killing was simply pleasure, as nothing was taken from Debbie's home. The next month, on October 2nd, another woman was assaulted and murdered. Her name was Susan Helms. She was a doctor at the Medical College of Virginia in Richmond. Susan's husband had returned home and received no response from his wife when he called out to her. He made his way up to the bedroom thinking that she was asleep, but again found no trace of Susan. He then opened up the closet and found Susan's body lying on the floor. Investigators realized that the killer had gained access the same way as with Debbie's murder, via window. This time, the culprit had to cut through the outside screen panel to get in. Another similarity to Debbie is that Susan also died as a result of strangulation. Then on November 22nd, another life was claimed. This time it was 15-year-old Diane Cho, who was attending Manchester High School. Diane was also raped and strangled. She was found dead in her parents' apartment in Chesterfield County, which is not too far from Richmond. Something interesting to note is that before her death, Diane frequently told her friends about this creepy dream she kept having. In it was a man that followed her around. She didn't really know what he wanted, but she knew she was in danger. And whenever she was out shopping, she believed that she saw the exact same man from her dreams stalking her in real life. On one occasion, she and a friend went to watch a movie at the Cloverleaf Mall, and after exiting the theater, Diane froze in fear and told her friend that her stalker was in the parking lot. But unfortunately, Diane's friend didn't get a good look at the man. The final confirmed victim in this series of killings was Susan Tucker, who was also and strangled in her condo located in Arlington, Virginia. Susan was 44 years old, and it's believed that she was killed less than a week from Diane's death date. Around the time of the announcement of Diane's death, the